Hello, everybody. Welcome to our open for discussion session on unlocking collections. I'm Bill Sherman. I'm director of the Warburg Institute, and I'm hosting today's event with my colleague Clare Lees, who's director of the Institute of English Studies. Open for Discussion is an annual series of conversations convened by the University of London School of Advanced Study. And its aim is to bring the necessary voices to bear on our most pressing questions. We've been using this year's series, the inaugural series, to talk about what the COVID-19 pandemic has made visible or perhaps brought into sharper focus. And when we knew that topic, it didn't take long for Clare and I to agree on either the topic for tonight or for our contributors. We are, after all craving access to the objects, the places, and the institutions that carry our collective memory. And I mean craving. Some of us have not been to a museum or worked in a library for more than a year. And those of us who do run those places have had to struggle not just with Perspex shields or one-way routes, but with serious financial crises or challenges to the way we work that are challenging their very being. So at this point, with everybody really running out of patience and really getting desperate, we thought it was exactly the right time to bring together a group of people who can give us insightful and inspiring glimpses of the work that they have been doing to unlock our collections before, during, and after COVID, whether it's bringing objects out of storage, revealing hidden histories of colonization, or using digital tools to record and share cultural heritage. And indeed, we have a veritable dream team of panelists who have kindly agreed to join us today. And I'm going to introduce all of them now, and they'll give introductory statements on the work that they've been doing in turn. Clare Lees will then lead them in a group discussion about some of the issues that they've opened up. And last but not least, we'll leave plenty of time for you in the audience to ask your questions. As you'll see, to ask a question, don't use the chat box, which is sometimes used. That's been disabled, but use the Zoom webinar's Q&A box. There should be a button at the bottom of your screen for Q&A. Where you can type your question at any time, and we'll keep track of them for the discussion later. So without any further ado and no more housekeeping, let me just introduce this amazing group of people that we've brought together to shed light on this important topic. The first speaker will be Rebecca Bailey. Rebecca's head of exhibitions and outreach for Historic Environment Scotland. She has long been a leading voice in collections-based research and public engagement. And as you'll hear, that's why she's currently program director for Towards a National Collection, sometimes affectionately known as TANK by its acronym, the government's 5-year, £19 million program devoted to uniting and opening the UK's collections. Adam Lowe, second, is a true polymath who is widely considered the world's leading figure in the fields of the fabrication of art and the reproduction of cultural heritage. Adam's teams at the Factum Foundation in Madrid have produced perfect copies of works that have been destroyed and even objects that were never built. And as he will explain, he has created a center in Venice devoted to new technology and best practice for analyzing and recording cultural heritage. Our third speaker is Catriona Cannon, who is Deputy Librarian and Keeper of Collections at Oxford's Bodleian Libraries, where she has responsibility for an amazing range of things, including learning spaces, special collections, the library's research unit for heritage science, and the public engagement program. She's co-investigator of opening the Edgeworth papers and was principal investigator for the Center for Digital Scholarship project. But I'm especially happy today to welcome her as a new colleague. In the summer, I think it's in June, she will actually be joining us here at the University of London as the new librarian of Senate House Library. We couldn't be happier. Fourth, Catherine Ince is Chief Curator of V&A East, the Victoria and Albert Museum's new museum and collection center on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London. Catherine joined the V&A after 5 years at the Barbican and 4 at the British Council. And at the V&A, she's led the extraordinary development of a new open access facility for the V&A's non-displayed collections, connecting them in new ways to both local and global lives. And finally, we welcome Maria Fusco, Professor of Interdisciplinary Writing at Duncan of Jordanston College in Dundee. Maria is a Belfast-born writer working across art writing, fiction, performance, and theory, and her award-winning work is often focused on specific sites and is helping us to bring past spaces and lost voices to life. So we're delighted to have this amazing group of people with us tonight. And I am going to hand directly over to Rebecca Bailey for her presentation.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to screen share in a moment. I'm going to show you a short film and then tell you a little bit more about our programme, but it might start rather loudly, so I thought I would warn you.
Creativity and culture, it's always had the power to bring us together by entering our hearts, challenging our perspectives. But we've never had the ability to bring it all together. Let it mingle, get to know each other. History has contrived to keep our masterpieces and artifacts apart. Maybe it's time to see what happens when they come together. Maybe they're connected in ways we don't even know about yet. Because all our separate collections are also one single collection, our national collection. And we should all have access to it, to unlock its power, its beauty, and its secrets. Shining a light on the connections between collections and their influence. That's what we're working towards. Unlimited access in a virtual world. So, watch this space. We're moving towards a national collection.
I'm really hoping you could see that because it was on my other screen. Did that work?
It was perfect. It was absolutely, it was, in fact, it was moving, as the end of it says.
We had great fun making it, I can tell you. So just to say a few words about the programme at this stage. So the mission of Towards a National Collection is to support research that breaks down the barriers that exist between the UK's cultural heritage collections, with the aim of opening them up to new research opportunities and encouraging the public to explore them in new ways. And as we all know, national can be a somewhat loaded term. So I just want to say right now that for our programme, we simply mean the breadth and range of culture and heritage collections held in the UK. In terms of our funding, we have £18.9 million from the Strategic Priorities funding of UKRI and Arts and Humanities Research Council. And we're using that funding for 3 phases of projects. We've got 8 foundation projects underway, 3 COVID-19 projects recently started, and we're in the middle of assessing up to 5 large-scale discovery projects. So our foundation projects, as I say, underway. They're running for up to 2 years. They have about £200,000 each. They're all led by independent research organisations, all in partnership with universities, and most of them have additional partners as well. And they include investigation of visual search, messy data, persistent identifiers, IIIF, as well as outdated language and catalogues, crowdsourcing, location data, and born digital collections. And in each of these areas, broadly speaking, they're reviewing the current position, developing and testing methodologies through case studies, and presenting recommendations for future practice. So the clue is absolutely in the name. They're the foundation for what we're taking forward. Our discovery projects, which are going to be much more substantial, nearly £3 million each over 3 years, their objectives are to carry out world-class interdisciplinary research in key thematic areas, to grow and diversify audiences by introducing the public to new ways of engaging with collections, to devise technological and organizational solutions to the barriers between online collections and catalogues, and to deliver benefit not only to the independent research organizations and their collections, but also to other collections of different scale and geographic location. And we want to create a sound evidence base for the future development of a virtual national collection. Finally, in terms of impact, all of our discovery projects, and in fact the programme overall, will dissolve barriers between collections, increase research capability, and enhance public engagement. Thank you.
All very good things. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that overview. Someone has asked in the Q&A already if you can put the link for that film, which I think is on YouTube, into the Q&A. That would be great. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we move quickly to Adam Lowe. And Adam, you should be able to share your screen.
I hope
looks good.
So
yes.
I'm going to try and run very, very quickly in 5 minutes, perhaps 7, through what Factum Foundation is really involved in. So I want to start that archives are really the evidence of museums doing their duty, doing their job. And that job, in addition to public functions, is also preservation, classification, study, and long-term storage. So really, the question is, how can this be done in the most productive way? And what role can digital technologies play in that? During COVID, it's become increasingly clear that the relationship between online activities and offline activities needs to be rethought in very dramatic ways. So Bill mentioned in the introduction that I recently, a couple of years ago, set up Archive, which stands for the Analysis and Recording of Cultural Heritage in Venice, which has support and funding from the Helen Hamlin Trust. And Archive is a collaboration between the Cheney Foundation, EPFL, and Factum Foundation. And basically our main role is to focus on how best to deliver high resolution recording systems, which very often means we have to design them and build them. On the left of this screen, there are 2 systems. One we've made in Madrid and scans the surface of paintings, and the other is a book scanning system we made for Dagestan. But really the focus is on this Lazy Susan, a rotary table that's a high resolution, high speed recording system for double-sided documents. And it can record about 3,500 double-sided images at 700 dpi per day and automatically download them with initial metadata tags. But during COVID, the question came up between all the partners is, why don't we try and do something really ambitious? Why don't we try to record the whole of the island of San Giorgio Maggiore at high resolution? And of course, these terms are always very relative. So what do I mean by high resolution? I mean, we can record the facade of the Church of San Giorgio so that every sculptural element is recorded at sub-millimetric accuracy. And the image of the sculpture is a 3-dimensional model. It means that the inscription above the door can be studied by conservators for condition monitoring again at sub-millimetric levels. It means we work to find simple ways to present the data. So to make high-resolution 3D models that can be accessed by anyone without complex software. It means we're looking at different ways of presenting it. So the image here on the right is actually a three-dimensional model. It means we listen to conservators, people involved in preservation, and in the case of the Chini Foundation, the Palladian courtyard has real problems with salt damage. So here you have on the left an image, a render, and on the right evidence of the resolution we have, which is down to the grains in the surface. A couple of years earlier, we'd used similar technologies to record the trophy wall on the south face of St. Mark's, and actually use it to understand, in a way, what Ruskin meant by the stones of Venice. But I also love the way you can play. It can be speculative. So one of Factum's great achievements was making the facsimile of Veronese's wedding at Cana, and the conversations that come up were always about whether there was a lantern window above the painting and what was on the floor. So you can show why there wasn't a lantern window after the painting was finished, because you couldn't see the painting. And obviously the floor carries through into the painting like all the other architectural details do. But at Archive, we're trying to be very inclusive and think broadly about what technology can do. So we're setting up a collaboration with DiviRod, who are putting in a monitoring system to monitor the relationship between the land and the water 24/7. And I think it's this kind of approach, a dynamic approach, that's changing how we use the technology and how we see the subjects we're recording. In Bishop Auckland, in County Durham, Jonathan Raffa, who's building the Spanish galleries, gave us the unique opportunity to kind of build what I like to think of as a series of very promiscuous relationships. So they're relationships in which everyone benefits. And as you can see on the screen, we're working with Casa Ducal de Medinaceli, the Humanidad de Santa Caridad in Seville, and others. And we're actually building a museum that has no original objects, but they're all physically present. One of the things that came up that I love is we were recording the tabernacle with the resurrecting figure of Christ by El Greco. And during the work, we found a photo from before the Civil War. So we've actually reconstructed the tabernacle as it was. And what you start to see is it's actually a form of automata. In Seville, we're working with Casa Natal de Velázquez to record all of the civilian paintings of Velázquez. And actually behind me, you have one. But it's extraordinary what happens when you can live with these things and juxtapose them and move them. In Rome, in the Raphael show last year, we were able to build an exact facsimile of a section of the Pantheon, Raphael's tomb, but as it was when Raphael first died. We also worked with the V&A and the Royal Collection to make, well, we've recorded all of the cartoons, which are on the V&A's website, but to make an exact facsimile that could be shown next to the tapestry. And the resolution we're talking about is breathtaking and in 3 dimensions. So I think the evidence on the V&A's website is worth visiting. But what I really love is how it enables you to rethink things. You can bring diverse objects back together. So for the whole of COVID, there was the exhibition in Bologna of all the panels of the Politico Grafoni brought back for the first time. We've just, with the Musée Correr, finished recording Carpaccio's 2 Women on a Balcony. And in Madrid, we've just finished recording El Greco's Annunciation with Banco Santander, with Fundación Santander. And what's fascinating about both of these paintings is they're both cut up paintings. With the El Greco, we're working with Case Western Reserve University to see if we can use the high resolution 3-dimensional recording and machine learning technologies to identify which sections of the painting were done by El Greco, which were done by his son, and which were done by others, and which had been too heavily restored to identify. With the Carpaccio, we've recorded the bottom part, but we really hope we'll soon be able to record the top part, and we're trying to fix the date now. In Nigeria, we're working to record all the Backwell monoliths. So some archives are out in the field. And I think in this case, we were very fortunate because the Bodleian holds Philip Allison's records made in the late 60s. And of course, at this time, it was the Biafran Civil War. And many of the objects got moved, so post 1970. And right now, to finish, we're finalizing with Jama Musa Jama an agreement to send a team to Somaliland to start recording the paintings at Laasgil, but also to see how we can help transfer skills and technologies to allow local teams to digitize at the highest resolution their own heritage. And I think this is the model that we're really trying to push, to put the data in the public domain so it can be experienced in diverse forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Absolutely amazing. And every time I see these things, I think, you know, I don't know what is more amazing, the technology or the thinking and the idea is really, really great. So now, Catriona, Cannon, if you would come on screen and share your presentation.
Thanks very much. Is that all good?
Looks good.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks very much, Bill, and to Claire and Bill for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be participating in this. My example focuses on two areas, using collections to bring back groups of people who are written out of history by highlighting records of the past. And secondly, demonstrating how cultural and scientific collections contribute to student life, academic research, and the university engagement with its community. On the first point, collections like the Bodleian have all these wonderful riches. We know that more than half of them never see the light of day, and that's probably being very optimistic. And inevitably, it's the missing voices, it's the dispossessed, whose history and records don't come to the surface. And this beautiful quote from Virginia Woolf is relevant here. She's talking about women in fiction, but it's equally applicable to other groups who've been written out of history. And what I would say is that memory institutions, if they do it right, they can link these people, these records back up together and fill in the periods of silence that Virginia Woolf talks about by mining their collections, and preferably with the help of academic specialists. So my example is going to be a Bodleian Library's 2018 exhibition to commemorate the anniversary of women's suffrage in the UK and Ireland. And this is the poster that we had for the exhibition. I commissioned it myself, but it was curated by a historian, an Oxford historian, Professor Senya Paseta. All the items were drawn from the Bodleian collections. And I've pulled out two items that I'm very particularly fond of. This is a letter from Florence Nightingale. And of course, everybody's heard of Florence Nightingale and they think of her as a nurse, but actually the extent of her influence in policy is not so well known. And this is a letter that she wrote to Ackland, who is the Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford. And it's worth noting that he wrote to her and asked for her opinion because she was seen as an authority on policy in general areas. And this is on the controversial, then as now, topic of nurses' education. And there's some really lovely quotes near the top of the page. You can see, hence it happens, alas, but too often, that the apparently best nurse sometimes does not succeed, even after having been certified on sufficient after trials. And then further down, how can any mere examination tell what even patients, matrons, physicians learn of their nurses' only experience? And finally, On the second page, nursing is not only an art, but a character. And then my second item is from Ebeli Hobhouse. Anyone who's read Sarah Perry's Essex Girls, which was published last year in 2020, will know her. But for those of you who don't, she was a pacifist who opposed the Anglo-Boer War. She traveled to South Africa in late 1900 to see the concentration camps that were being run by the British. They were called refugee camps, but essentially, I think most people would agree they were concentration camps. And she recorded and photographed the deprivation and squalor she witnessed there. And this is the report of a visit to the camps that she wrote and published in 1901, which created an instant sensation and led to a public commission. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about using collections to engage with the academic community and externally. So in the case of this exhibition, we would often involve student curators for our exhibitions and displays. In this case, we didn't actually, but we did have this wonderful group of a cappella students, women students, who call themselves the Oxford Bells, singing at our launch event. And they were extremely well received and they were really happy to participate. So when I first got in touch with them and said, would you like to sing at our opening event? They said to me, yeah, we're really keen to do this because it fits with our values. So it's kind of part of that whole student experience and the students as, you know, politically aware. So it was great to have them along. And then if I look at research, this is a blog entry by the curator, Senya Paseta, where she tells of her surprise in discovering that the Bodleian held items related to suffrage, which is her research topic. She talks about how, you know, she was used to thinking of the LSE, but she didn't realize the Bodleian had a lot, even though it was her home institution. She describes how the catalogue don't do the collections justice, which is an interesting point and refers back to my earlier one, and her pleasure. She describes her pleasure and her satisfaction in making them better known. And then finally, something which has really come into its own in the pandemic, this exhibition facilitated the use of Bodleian collections by school children through our schools program. So we put some materials together, resources for teachers when covering this subject. So like I said at the beginning, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk about the theme of unlocking collections. I had immense difficulty in pinning down to one example. I've got a whole list of topics that I hope come up in the panel discussion, so I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks very much.
That's brilliant, Catriona. Thank you very much. And again, look forward to doing similar things here together at University of London. So Catherine, Ince, over to you about V&A East.
Thanks, Bill, and thank you to you and Claire for the invitation to join you this evening. I'm just going to pull up my presentation and give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through V&A East, which we're on-site building at the moment. It won't be open for a few years yet. As Bill mentioned, we're developing a new museum here on this site opposite the Olympic Stadium, and a new collection and research centre in the former media centre for the Olympic Games as part of the sort of legacy of the London 2012 Olympics, which gives us a fantastic opportunity to open up our collections, to develop new ways of exploring and engaging with the visual and material culture that we hold, to serve audiences in different ways, and to be a platform for contemporary art, design and performance cultures. So we're designing a new museum which is underway and developed by O'Donnell and Toomey architects, and then Diller, Scafidio and Renfro, New York-based practice, are building our collection and research center. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the museum, and then move on really to the collection and research center, which is most pertinent for our discussion this evening. We're presenting V&A collections across two galleries. We have a major exhibition space, so we'll be developing an exhibitions program, and then we have a sort of project space on the top floor of the building, which we want to give over to more installations-based live creative program delivered in partnership with institutions and organizations from across the world. And we're taking a very sort of agenda-led approach and
a contemporary lens on our collections to enable new readings that are sort of pertinent for today's world. And then at the Collection Research Centre, we have a new public store. So we needed to move our collections from our store in Blythe House that we've occupied for the past 30 years. It's in West London. It's a little bit accessible. We do have space for research appointments, but it's less than ideal. And this opportunity to move our collections, which came because we had to move out of the store, gave us a new impetus to think about how we can open up the V&A's collections and archives, create better spaces for their study, and also develop an institution where we can reach broader publics and inspire new sort of forms of engagement and encounter with our collections. So this is what is emerging. I just wanted to flag the ways in which we've been working in the lead up to developing and devising V&A East. The sort of critical research dimension of our thinking is really important, that that's done in collaboration with practitioners, with residents in different communities of East London. We've been lucky enough to have some Mellon Foundation funding to develop some research programs. We're interested in working with practitioners for whom the collections are, a fantastic research source, and that are important in their own practice. So you can see here young designers based at Rabbits Road Press in Manor Park who have particularly interested in the sort of political activism of the See Red Women's Workshop in the 70s and 80s. We hold many of their works in the collection, and we've also then been lucky enough to have resident practitioners coming into this mix from abroad who sort of share a set of values, working in similar disciplines to using their collections as a jumping off point to make new work and to make new sort of statements. So we're making a kind of integrated store, gallery, museum, classroom and laboratory. And so when people visit both sites, they'll be able to encounter the collection in many new and different ways. What I'm trying to just give you here is a little bit of an overview of the different sort of forms of engagement and spaces that we will have. As you saw in the sort of architectural rendering of the Collection and Research Centre, we've punctuating the sort of public experience of the store by being able to bring back or put back on display or display for the first time significant interior and architectural fragments. So you can see here on the right hand side a less than brilliant render of a magnificent late 15th century carved wood ceiling that we have in the collection that's never been on display. It's from a palace in Toledo in southern Spain. That's currently in conservation. This will be the new ceiling of a little sort of intervention exhibition space. We want to work with artists and researchers in new ways. You can see Victoria here in the middle as part of a program where we were looking at decolonizing sort of readings of the collection. And on the left, you can see a space that we're developing for some of the largest 2D objects in the collections, are stage cloths and monumental sort of textiles and paintings. This will allow us to show these works, to study them in new ways. Adam will probably be back to scan them and help us understand them in different ways. And then, we can create new sort of conversations and research around these collections. And this is my last slide, and I just wanted to sort of bring you into a little bit of the live world at the moment where we are working. We've started a youth advisory group pilot for 6 months, paid opportunity for young people, 15 young people from across East London who are interrogating what we're doing, giving us their feedback, telling us what they want to see, understand, explore, contribute to the knowledge and expertise that we hold. And it's a very exciting moment of development of the project. So looking forward to talking more about it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Amazing, Catherine.
There we go.
Thank you so much. And again, Catherine knows that I worked on that project myself at an early stage, and it's so exciting to see it coming together in the ways that it is. So
Yeah, I
thank
could have
you,
teased
thank
you
you,
more
thank
with
you. You
pictures
could
of on
have.
site, but I'll save that for another day. But
We'll save that for later. So let's finish our initial presentations then with Maria Fusco, please.
Thank you, Bill.
Great.
Thank you, Claire, for the invitation. I'm going to make a short reading, which it's work in progress. They're unfinished and unmediated field notes that I've made as part of a new project which I'm doing, which is around female anchorites. So they were medieval religious solitaries. What I'm going to read you from is a piece that I've written, a durational piece of sight writing that I've written in Julian's cell in Norwich. And Julian is perhaps the most well-known of the anchoresses, and she's often acknowledged to be the first woman whose work was published in English. So I'll begin. To raise quickly from a dream, to dream hot, to know you're meant to be somewhere else. The first thing you notice is nothing. How history enters the body. Performing the collection in space, but not in time. To be an evacuee from time, but not from space, concise and apart, spare. Against scale, you insist your place in the world with a pinch. The desire for meat, the need for salt and savory, the softness of this food, its adequacy. Wet ears flowing with wax, comprehension flowing outwards, the simulation of time passing, its precarity. The small sounds from outside in the church, creaks of wooden knees, the tap of a finger on a leather-bound book. I am as small as a mouse and just as greedy. The return to Julian's text, words creating sensation, blip, burr, hum, a hum. I am the hum, no, she is the hum. There is nothing but the hum. Description knows nothing of time. How pretty the light is today, how easy to write by its dander. A temperate and clean day. Writing here, in the light like this, I see how the nib of the pen momentarily attaches to the page, how it fixes to make a spidery mark. The words it renders have the weight of a shadow. She would have followed the light around the room. She would have been up before dawn and waited until the light kissed her. Of course she would. You have moved, so you're sitting directly opposite the wooden crucifix. Obviously, his body is carefully modest. His arms are extremely long. You can't remember. There is much you can't recall. It's the dried quality of his blood that's the thing, because it means she already missed the main event. She's too late and she knows it. Inserting herself into the material fabric of his death after the fact, just after it's happened. Is she always late? Is she always out of time? She is wearing a mask. I've laid my mask over Julian's image on the book. She is too late. I crawl under the reconstructed altar. It appears to be made from an old headstone that's been inverted. I see letters carved into the stone. I think they're trimming tapers outside in the church. The snip is short. Maybe they're trimming flowers. The stems splash in their sap. The flowers are already dead. The welcome distraction of this fly buzzing about. The numbness of this writing process, capturing an ambient collection. The slowness of its delivery, taking its time. Using Julian's memory as a nib, working with breath. Maybe the dryness of his blood was an effort to combat the dampness around her. To hear the tiny bones in your ear creaking, to hear them hearing themselves, the muttering of tiny mites living amongst your eyelashes, the clicking of their moribund legs busy at work. They labour more than you do. Every single insect in the world labours more than you do. the detail of your hair growing. This is silence. This is isolation.
Fantastic. Maria, thank you so much. Can't wait to hear and hopefully see the rest. Everybody, we're now going to gather together into our panel discussion. And as we do so, as we get brought into the same screen as a group, I just want to ask quickly, and I'm going to hand over to Clare Lees, my colleague, to moderate the discussion, but I just want to ask quickly because the prompt for this evening's topic was, of course, the COVID pandemic. And I just want to ask quickly if anyone in particular wants to jump in and say, you know, all of these projects had been going for some time before the pandemic. And what have you learned from the pandemic, or what has changed about your perspective during this past year? So anyone who wants to jump in, please do.
I think for our program, it's added a whole new imperative. We knew what we wanted to do was important. We knew it was needed, and suddenly no one could get near collections. And even people who worked in collections couldn't always access their own collections. So all of a sudden for us, it put a spotlight, a focus on what was possible and gave us a real drive. And on a more practical level, it also seems to have opened up discussion, opened up sort of global discussion around issues. So rather than, you know, getting 20 people to get on a train to London and have a chat, we now have 300 people from all over the world bringing different perspectives. And I mean, I know that's a very common issue, but it's been really, really positive for a project like ours.
I mean, for me, what we've seen here in Factum is for the last 20 years, we've been desperately trying to persuade people to think seriously about high resolution digital recording in diverse forms. And suddenly we got slow at first, but then this real tsunami of institutions calling to say, we don't look different from anyone else online. We don't have a presence online. So even the great museums look like provincial museums, and actually some of the provincial museums look great because they'd focused a little bit more on actually telling their story. So I think apart from waking people up, there's an awareness that unless museums engage with, and institutions and universities and collections and archives engage with this online offline difference, they're going to lose out, because I think online people can have events like this which are meaningful and can work, and you can also reach a global audience, not a local one. So I think the potential for museums to actually generate money from online presence as well as from visitor numbers, so the emphasis on ticketing, merchandise, visitor numbers is something that's looking a bit short-sighted.
I would jump in to say I agree with very much of what's been said. Museums are looking very, you know, strongly at their digital engagement, what it means to be online. But what I notice in the part of London where I'm you know, very engaged, and having been at a Newham People's Council meeting last night, we cannot ignore the stark inequality of access to digital tools. Digital poverty is a very real thing, and it's quite interesting when you talk to younger generations, as we've been doing. There's an assumption that because they're born within that age, that's the sort of first sort of, you know, encounter that they would like, but lots of young people are telling us that don't assume that we don't want to touch and feel and engage with material things. So these are the sort of longing in the pandemic to get back into social encounters and encounters with art is important. But this question of how we reach when inequality is so stark is really important.
Yeah, and I would add too, I mean, we have many areas where we're very active in the digital scene, but our engagement program, as you have seen, was up to now a very physical thing. And ironically, one of the exhibitions that we actually had to postpone was about smelling and touching, and it was called Sensational Books, and it will happen, but it wasn't going to be appropriate for a time when nobody was allowed to touch anything. I would say the other thing that where we really feel I think there's something around moving to digital, and I've had conversations with all the public engagement professionals all around Oxford University, and we're all wrestling with what does digital engagement look like and how do we make it meaningful, and we're not just porting the physical experience straight across to a digital one. But the other thing that I would say, we have been planning and hope to launch an exhibition around mental health in conjunction with medical sciences within the University of Oxford, which I think is, there was already quite a digital stream to that, and we were working in collaboration with the March network, which is run out of UCL. But I think, you know, with the atomization of society and the emphasis on mental health, we feel really that this is coming at a really good time, I suppose. And I think that, you know, the March network does show the importance of cultural institutions in mental health. And that's something that goes back to 2018. So again, you know, I think that's a really important thing. It's not the pandemic, but it's definitely related to it.
Perhaps that's where I can come in, because first of all, thank you for all those wonderful presentations. And I think I've gone through a whole range of emotions, from exhilaration at the promise of, you know, towards a national collection, and the dizzying array of, what was it, promiscuous relations that Adam can pull out of this amazing work that you're doing all around the world, to those strange silences that Catriona so poignantly reminded of us, to that reminder of the Rabbit Road Press, and then to which is close to something I've been thinking about a lot just recently, and then to Maria's reading, which managed to do something I think that is very difficult in the sphere we're in at the moment, which is to use the voice in a different way, and to use the voice to connect us into collections. And I wondered, and so that's just my first observations that I just wanted to put out there, but I wondered, as a kind of opening question, one of the things that you're all doing is trying to think about not just unlocking collections, but connecting communities, and thinking very hard about different kinds of places. So maybe I can just throw that open to anybody who wants to respond about the challenge of connecting, as I think Adam put it, online and offline spaces, and peoples and communities. This is something that you're all working with and sharing. So whoever wants to jump in, that would be great.
I think, Claire, for me, what's at stake within that is who has the right to speak and in what way.
Yeah.
And when as with the project that I shared a little bit of there, I mean, I now carry that the collection in that instance is the cell itself, obviously, and the extant existing writings. So I now carry that collection. And enact that collection through this kind of creative and critical engagement with it. So in that sense, that's the kind of offline engagement with that particular collection, and obviously that's actioned in my instance through voice.
Yeah, and I think that's a particularly interesting example, but trying to do both together. Both the offline and the online, as we are here, is something that I think appeals to all of us. Maybe, Adam, do you want to go? Yeah.
I have to pick up. I think it's right. Who has the right to speak, and how those voices are heard is incredibly important. So one project we began a few years ago was with the Sacred Cave of Kamkuwaka, which is in the Upper Jingu, just off the Batovi River. And we were working with the Wauja community there. Nathan Mann was working very strongly with Akari Wauja, who's their voice, their oral tradition bearer. And Akari kept saying, please, you have to record the sacred cave. When we sent a team to record the sacred cave, it had been completely vandalized. So it was an attempt to neutralize the voice. But we scanned, fortunately it had been done very fast. So we scanned the whole cave complex, and working with the Wauja community, and some of the images I love that come out of Factum are these ones of Akari and all of the elders in the community discussing, because everything's collectively agreed, but discussing the recreation, the digital restoration of all of the petroglyphs that were being done from historical photographs and from the ability we had to extract data from those to map it on. And we've made, so again, the other point I'd love to make here is there's an assumption that digital is somehow virtual.
Yeah.
But that's not true anymore, not for the last 20 years. So digital can be material too. Yeah. And I think it's terribly important when we remade the Sacred Cave, and when Shirley Krenak and Takuma Kikuru and Akari Wauja came here to Madrid, and now the British Council's given money to put all this in a form and build connectivity online, so that actually this restored cave, this restored creation myth narrative has really found a new voice that's actually much more dynamic than the very focused use at the end of a long trek, 2 days through the Amazon to find it. And I think this is one of the uses, but there are many, many, many that give new voices to new audiences.
I kind of want to ask Catherine if she wants to come in at that point, and I'm curious to know how she's working with her youth advisory groups and whether those voices are taking the V&A East in directions that were unexpected and unanticipated. How are you using their voices?
Every single day. They're a fantastic group, and I think one of the things, just as we were speaking, is, and that we're reflecting on a lot at the moment, is how do you go from being hyper local and having this kind of intense sort of relationship with the many varied communities of this sort of small constituency in London, and then how are we meaningful as a national institution, and then how are we global? And this sort of yo-yoing between offline, online, on-site, elsewhere is a really important sort of, these dynamics are what we're trying to sort of figure out now. I mean, I think that we're doing lots of, I hate the word consultation, but we are doing lots of consultation. We've got the youth pilot. This is not the first time we've been working with young people. We've done lots of sort of quite in-depth research over the years to build up important relationships, particularly with youth organizations in East London who provide a very important sort of space for young people and platforms for their voices to be heard. So we're taking that quite seriously. I took out a few slides today. One of the ones that I had in was where we're trying to sort of test program ideas by taking some familiar formats like our Friday Late and doing them in East London. And at one of those events, we invited the young people who had conducted a sort of sociological survey of their area, looking at the kind of impact of gentrification and regeneration on where they lived, and what they found to be the positive benefits, what they found to be the challenges. And they devised a panel discussion, and it was a kind of fabulous moment for their research to be heard by quite a different constituency from the people who maybe would download their report or be engaging with them. And this kind of discourse, these kind of conversations are what we're trying to embed into the ethos of the institution. So we're trying to look at what is the sort of long tail of our relationships with all of our different sort of communities and constituents, and it's not entirely known as yet, but it's interesting also. What we notice too is that the time it takes to build something like this, and in when you're engaged in an aspect of a project, you want that sort of instant, like, I want to see the consequences of what I've just fed in coming into play, and that's not always entirely possible. So yeah, we're trying to just create the environment for for the two-way dialogue and for the results to be palpable, embedded.
That is a wonderful answer that fits very nicely with some of the great questions that are coming in the Q&A. And one that's on my mind that leapt out at me while I was listening to you, Catherine, but is relevant to everybody, is how do you measure good digital access? How are you tracking that when you're thinking about digital access to collections? Maybe Rebecca, maybe that's something that you could pick up.
Yeah, we've been very busy recently writing the evaluation strategy for Towards the National Collection, and we were very keen that it wasn't about you've managed to join 10 collections, or you've done this. It was more what happens when you join those collections. So what kind of new kind of research can be done, what new questions can be asked as a result of being able to search across collections, and what new public understandings can come out of that. And because we're Research Council funding, we're partly concerned with the public's understanding of research. So what if the product has a wonderful exhibition, do they get sort of information within that exhibition of the research that's gone into it? And so I suppose it's the whole, well, what's happened as a result? Not just what have you done, but what impact have you had on your target audiences, which for us is the public, which is obviously incredibly broad, and researchers. Have we made life different for both of those sectors is what we're particularly interested in.
And I suppose that relates to, I mean, that connects with, again, this, this online digital offer, and how you can. I'm just thinking about this. Yeah, here's a great question. What do you think are the most challenging things for a collection to make it more inclusive to different groups of communities? Because that's obviously something that's in your mind, Rebecca, as you're designing this program. It's in all our minds. It's something that Catriona was talking about directly addressing, and so was Adam, I think. So, how do you design your collections to make them more inclusive, I suppose?
Yeah, well, one of our current projects, Provisional Semantics, led by Tate, is looking at the legacy of what's in our catalogues. So the kind of language that was used in the past, the way collections were considered. So, the information might be all about the collector, not about the Indigenous artist, and the kind of language that's in there. And they've obviously found this a massive challenge, and they've been particularly addressing their own attitudes to things like race, because they're saying you can't start that exercise until you've assessed your own white privilege or your own position on race. So it's proven to be a very, very thoughtful project, and we're hoping it's obviously going to lead to some quite tangible recommendations on how to deal with legacy and how to change, but it's a massive challenge.
So maybe there's another great question that's come in here from, I think it's Olivia Baskerville, who says, and I'll just read it out, the slogan of the e-shopping websites service Squarespace is, a website makes it real. Is this becoming increasingly the case in the cultural sector? And is that to be welcomed or avoided? And I can see everybody smiling on the panel on that one.
Can I jump in but answer somebody else's question, which I think is sort of slightly relevant too,
Okay,
which is Matthew Hallow's.
You guys take it over.
Where I think it's a really good question. What makes it real? And in lots of museum websites, it's about sort of a channel of marketing, finding out what's on. Different users have different needs as they navigate our collection data and find information like the Raphael cartoons project that Adam mentioned. But also what Matthew's question is pointing to, I think, which is what are the key aspects of of a good and effective digital offer that's not merely a sort of either marketing or a direct transfer of the physical offer. And I think that is exactly where the question is: what is the digital content and interface and interaction that we need to develop and want to have with audiences and communities, and how can we conceive of the digital space as a platform for creative content as much as information or some of that sort of, you know, pragmatic intel that one needs. And I think that's how we're thinking about it at the moment, without any conclusive answers, I must say.
But I have every confidence that curiosity and creativity will creep out of every pore if they're given space to do so. But I think sort of, not sure it's a direct answer, but museums, when I was very young and used to go to them, always presented objects as discrete things. And I think in a way, what's really made possible, and this goes back to the multiple voices, is that objects have become complex subjects, and actually we're able to read them, we're able to discuss them. And, you know, in a way, the great privilege of the museums of old, where they were almost always empty, and you didn't have to buy a ticket in advance, and you'd meet people and you'd talk. And I think if there are ways that collections and archives can stimulate dialogue and discussion amongst people from different areas and different, in a way, interest groups, then the subjects will really burst into life and demonstrate their fundamental for communication and bridging difference.
Thank you, Adam. It looks like Catriona wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking about co-curation. So we dipped our toe in that water in the Bodleian with a small display called Languages of God, which was around the Ethiopian and Eritrean collections. And we did literally co-curate with the Ethiopian and Eritrean community around the southeast of England. And it was an amazingly successful display. And the Ethiopian ambassador decided on a last minute visit to see it because he had, one of his staff, his embassy staff, had been to one of our workshops. But again, thinking about how that might translate across to a digital arena, you know, I still think we ran a project in 2012, which was a crowdsourcing project called What's the Score, where we tried to get people to describe digitized versions of scores that we had mostly from the 19th century that had been deposited through legal deposit. And it was very, very well publicized. I think it was like on the cover of the New Yorker or something, but it didn't work actually. And I mean, it was 2012. But I think I think one of the foundational projects in Tank is crowdsourcing. But I think, you know, I'm really, you know, my head of engagement in the Bodleian keeps on saying, I know you want us to do more crowdsourcing, but you know, I'm working on it. But I think, you know, that whole concept of what does co-curation look like in a digital world, and I would say, you know, there's still a place for physical co-curation as well, but it's it's 10 times more work than something that you put together yourself, because there's that dialogue, there's all the workshops, but then there's this incredibly rich exchange of views, you know, where it's not the academy talking down to a group of people or the public or whoever. There is genuinely an exchange, a two-way exchange, and, you know, the community taught us just as much as we taught them.
Mm-hmm. That's, I think, a really important point. I'm struck, I'm haunted in a sense by the thought that what Maria's project is doing is actually co-curating in one body, but speaking to somebody from the past. And I do want to, and I think that's actually a remarkable, I think that's an imaginative act that is lying behind all the presentations today. It's just that Maria gives voice to it in a particular way. So I think, yes, participatory research is really a way to engage and different audiences, but also take expert knowledge in different directions, which I think is what we want to do. There's a wonderful question in the Q&A about the length of time So I'm jumping from historical connections back to more contemporary, slightly more contemporary questions about media. And one of the questions in the Q&A is about the future preservation of digital objects. So let's think about, we can go back several hundred years to Julian of Norwich, and we can go forward. How do we future-proof these collections?
Well, I think that one's addressed to me, so I should jump in quickly at the beginning.
Yes.
And I can say long-term digital storage is a total nightmare. And the normal answer is it should be dispersed in the cloud. That has a lot of inherent problems. Here we have dispersed storage, we have on-site storage, and we have DAT physical storage. But the one that I am most interested in at the moment is one of our partners up in Norway called Pickle. And Pickle is writing digital microfilm and storing it on the Svalbard archipelago. But of course, the Svalbard archipelago is melting very fast, as we know from the seed bank. And they've now got a site which is draining, so hopefully it will be more stable. But long-term digital storage is much harder than storing paper. And what you find time and time again is digital archives rot and corrode and become inaccessible for hardware and software reasons exceptionally fast.
I think just to jump in here too, I think that preservation question is critical and sometimes gets in the way of the collecting. And then the collecting is also at the point of what is it that you're collecting, which is the really, the challenging thing with digital born media and that expansive world. And there's always a sort of pullback to the physical, which is, right. But at the same time, there's many questions open up as to what is the artifact, which every institution is engaged with.
Yeah. So I just want to throw that. I want to come back on that and press a little bit harder. So digital preservation is a nightmare. So what do we do about that? I mean, how do we plan for it? What strategies do we use? And you're speaking to a medievalist whose favorite medium is parchment. Okay, so I'm very happy to think in very long stretches of time. But I am very curious about this. I know it's a real challenge and a problem. There is the immediacy of the digital that is just terrific.
And I think what Adam's just outlined is like what is the spectrum of places where these this data sits and these artifacts sit. How do we ensure that sort of perpetuity? Who are the specialists who need to sort of enter? I'm coming from the perspective of my museum collection, and it's something that we're grappling with, quite intensely. And we need to bring that sort of knowledge from outside of the institution, because our material departments are cut more in the conservation and collections management are more focused on the traditional materials that we've collected. So it's not insurmountable, but it's there's a lot of thinking going on about how we need to evolve. I feel like I'm speaking a lot. Rebecca, maybe you have something to say here.
Well, only really that we're funding research led by the V&A at the moment on preserving the born digital. I guess in the grand scheme of things, though, it's a relatively small project. It's been very hard hit by COVID, so it hasn't really started delivering recommendations yet. But I suspect the phase they're in at the moment is identifying all the problems and how sort of difficult this whole field is. But I think one of the things that's come up very recently in conversations at the research councils is how do we reconcile digital storage with net zero emissions? And if anyone knows anything about that, I'm looking for information on it at the moment. So because in my naive world, you say, well, it's in the cloud, so it must be fine, but somebody must be powering the cloud. And how do we tackle that? So I'm afraid it's not just how you deal with different media, how you deal with the scale of it. It's how you actually deal with the emissions that come from that as well.
I've just written a text for a catalogue for the Irish Pavilion at Venice, which is about Ireland as a sort of, you know, telecommunications node. And I think it's in the next 10 years, maybe 30% of all of Ireland's power will go to the data industry. That is a huge presence there. Totally fascinating. It's almost seen as immaterial, but it really has a kind of huge earthy impact.
Fantastic. Can I just jump back in for one last time, because we're almost up. It's only 2 minutes left, I think, before we're supposed to finish. So we obviously just scratched the surface, and I'm going to do something really stupid, which is raise another huge issue that also could have been the prompt for tonight's discussion and would have probably created a very different set of perspectives, which is the national, international, and also in particular, if you want one single example, Brexit. So how has Brexit changed the perspective, again, of unlocking collections? How has it changed collections? Rebecca, if you become independent, it's going to be toward an international collection, surely. And I just wonder where this is leaving us. It's been the other bizarre head-spinning set of changes in the last few months. So quickly, anyone want to jump in? It's a huge topic. We need another panel. But
Catriona's sort of waving at me, so I think.
Oh, Catriona, go for it.
I'd really like to say something about this
Please,
from a university perspective. You know, one of the things I thought was really encouraging about the things that happened before TANC was set up was that the UK mapped its research infrastructure, and we were all invited to contribute. So us galleries, libraries, archives, we all entered. So we're all in the portal. So we're seeing side by side with these, you know, I don't know, what do you do with physics? You know, those kind of things that they have in Column where they do sort of high processing and stuff. We're seeing side by side with that as a fundamental part of the research infrastructure. But that feeds into something international. So, you know, we're feeding into the ESPRI, which is the European research infrastructure, and then there's global infrastructures. And I think that, you know, a lot of the research questions that are being asked at the moment are ones that we can only solve together. So, you know, we can Brexit away, but actually universities and knowledge institutions are part of something international, because they have to be, because we can't solve climate change on our own, you know, and all the other questions that we're looking at. And I would say the other thing is, I mean, an interdisciplinary and all of the other stuff goes in with that as well. The only other thing I wanted to say here is around the whole soft power thing. So universities and cultural institutions, they're kind of arm's length institutions. So they don't necessarily speak for government, and they are trusted. So we can speak to each other in a way that is trusted between different countries in a way that maybe governments can't always do.
That's a great answer. And I realize that we are up and out of our time, but I like the idea of saying we can Brexit all we want, but we have to be truly international to solve these major problems. And I think that's absolutely right. And I feel like we could have had another series of discussions, and maybe we will, about unlocking collections.
Indeed. So, and Claire, I just want to also say thanks to everybody who asked questions that weren't answered, because there are some really good ones in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that they get directed to the most appropriate person on the panel. It's a way for us to share those.
Yes.
And also, just speaking of sharing, if you know someone who wasn't able to join tonight, but would be interested in this conversation, it'll be available as a video not too long after. And I think, aside from thanking everybody, the last thing to say is that there are 2 more of these events done by our colleagues. So if you want to come to the Future Opens for discussion, then John, I think Millington, you should probably be able to give us the details. There they are. Brilliant. So that, from me, thank you.
And from me, thank you. And thank you, everybody. That's been wonderful.
Absolutely brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.